Hey guys, how are you? So I have another story for you guys, or another case for you guys, and I'm gonna kind of tell you that I wasn't able to find a lot of good photos for it, but I'm gonna show you guys what I can. And for some of them, it could be kind of upsetting. Some people, this case. But before I ruin it all or whatever, chase anybody off, let's go ahead and start. This case is about Laci and Scott Peterson. Okay, so you know how most men would be so excited to see those little pink lines and hearing those words, "You're going to be a daddy." But for this man in this case, those were the scariest words he could hear, and it would make him commit a heinous crime that no one could have imagined at all. Laci Peterson was a very outgoing, beautiful young woman who was attending Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I think that's how you say it, college, in 1995. It's a long name. I was worried I was going to forget it too. But while out eating at a local restaurant, Laci would see a very handsome waiter and would immediately ask the waiter that was serving her to give him her number. That's how outgoing she was and brave. This young waiter was Scott Peterson. And that's kind of where their love just ballooned. Sharon, Laci's mom, would absolutely fall in love with Scott also, and say that he was very charming, very polite, a perfect gentleman. I mean, what more could a parent want for their little girl? That sounds perfect. I know I'd want a perfect man like that for my daughter. And so when the couple got married just 2 years later, on August 9th, 1997, everyone was delighted and were excited to see the family grow. And this couple, they were like the superstar couple, it seemed. Like, they owned a little burger joint for a couple of years, and it did pretty well. But they wanted more, so they ended up selling it and moved north to Modesto, California. There the couple would have a beautiful home and share a beautiful golden retriever that was kind of like their first baby. And Scott would start his career as a fertilizer salesman. And he was very good at it. And Laci would follow her dream as a substitute teacher. She loved children. Then when Scott was 30 and Laci was 27, and they thought they had everything in their lives and they couldn't ask for anything more, they found out they were expecting their first baby, a son that they would end up calling Connor. Everyone would say that the couple seemed so ecstatic, especially the closer it got for them to have their little boy in their arms. But everything was not what it seemed, and everything would change on Christmas Eve 2002. This is, on this day, Scott would say he wanted to enjoy a golf game, but decided it was too cold, so he decided he was just going to go fishing. I don't like fishing in the cold, but to each their own. So he would drive to his warehouse office. There he said he would assemble a mortar sire, which is a woodworking tool to make tables. And then he would check his emails, and finally he would load up his boat that he owned and start the 90-mile drive to Berkeley Marina. Now remember, he drove 90 miles, okay? Okay, we're going to leave it at that. He drove 90 miles. And then when he would start heading back home, he would call his, at that time, 8-month pregnant wife and say, "Hey, beautiful, I'm on my way home, just back from fishing." Then he would ask her to pick up a basket at Villa Farms and then end it with, "I love you, sweetie." Scott said he arrived home at around 4:30 p.m. to find his dog in the backyard with the leash still on. And he had known that Laci was going to take their golden retriever out to a park near their house. And so when he saw the dog with the leash still on in the backyard, Laci was not home, and her purse was on the counter in the kitchen. He said later it seemed weird, but I guess not weird enough because he ended up grabbing some pizza out of the fridge and then went and took a shower. When asked later about this, he would say that he had just assumed Laci was at her parents' because later on that evening they were supposed to go over there for their Christmas Eve dinner. Finally, around 6:15 p.m., Scott decided to finally call Sharon, Laci's mom. And this is when she informed Scott that Laci was not there, and she actually hadn't talked to her all day, which was weird for this mother-daughter duo. They talked all the time, multiple times a day. They were very close. So that's when Sharon's boyfriend called 911 immediately. That day, a massive search by friends, community, law enforcement started just trying to find this pregnant mother. It was so cold out, and with her so close to having the baby, everyone was on edge. They had flyers, paper through the town. The FBI was called in to assist. This search would be a mass search. It would expand 4,000 acres of wetlands. It would go along the Stanislaus, the Tolomune, I don't know if I'm saying those right, and the San Quin rivers. I suck with names, guys. Shh. But days would go by and still no sign of Laci. Then on December 28th, after still no word, the family and friends put together a $125,000 reward for their safe return. Now, during this search for his wife and unborn son, detectives and witnesses would say that during her disappearance, Scott would be really quiet and very oddly removed. He didn't even seem concerned about his family at all because he was completely emotionless. This is when Detective Brashoni started questioning how much Scott actually knew about the disappearance of his wife. His story of going fishing that Christmas Eve just didn't make sense to Brashoni, who was a very avid fisherman himself. So he started thinking, like, why would you drive 90 miles away when there were many other places closer that he could have went? Many other places, and especially with your wife being 8 months pregnant and so close to being in labor. Also, when they started looking at the fishing equipment that Scott took that day, one of the fishing pole I don't know how to describe this, because if you're not a fisherman, you don't really understand, but the fishing pole that he used was one that you would use in a stream, not a bay. The lures are jigs used for like the deltas, not a bay. And when asked what he was actually fishing for and what bait he used, he didn't know. Like, what person does not know what bait they're using or what they're fishing for? Like, I get sometimes, like, I just go out there and fish, just catch whatever. But there's certain baits for certain fish, and everybody knows that. And you have to have certain rigs and everything like that for certain areas to fish. Like bays, streams, rivers, oceans, there has to be different rigs. None of his gear was actually meant for fishing at the bay at all. They also looked at his fishing license, and it was purchased December 20th. This is days before, and it was only a 2-day license. But Scott had said that it was a spare of the moment trip. 24th went out on Christmas Eve. He ordered this on the 20th for a 2-day fishing license, but it was a spare of the moment thing. Not buying it. Other people got suspicious about Scott's behavior when it came to New Year's Eve. There was 1,000+ people that held a candlelight vigil for Laci and Connor. And the entire time, they would say that Scott was on his phone and showed lack of genuine concern at all. But the biggest thing that made everyone really suspicious was when detectives found out that Scott was hiding a secret, a big secret. Scott was having an affair with a young single mother that was a young massage therapist named Amber Frey. So, November 20th, 2002. Scott and Amber were introduced by a friend, and she believed he was single. She believed he was single. I don't know if it's because he told her or the friend told her. I don't know, but she thought he was single. And Amber would say later on that she was so impressed because he would constantly be romantic towards her. For example, he would buy groceries to cook for her a romantic dinner at her house. He would buy her and her daughter gifts all the time and just shower her in affection. And she wasn't used to that. So she absolutely loved it. Then within a few weeks of dating in early December, Amber would say that Scott called her very emotional and confused. And to her, it was just weird. But he ended up confessing to her that he had been married before, but he had lost his wife earlier that year. And this would actually be the first holiday season without her. So right then and there, she would be end up feeling for him and understanding this is a very emotional time. I'm so sorry. But then he would go on to tell her that he was going to be out of town at the end of the month with some friends in Europe. So he wouldn't have to be home and stay home and just grieve and be miserable. So, but he had promised her that he was going to call her regularly. They were going to talk all the time and everything like that. So everything seemed okay with the couple until December 30th, okay? When Amber started feeling like something was off with Scott. And that's when the news came across. I don't know how she didn't see it or hear it or whatever, but the news came across and it showed Laci and her husband, Scott. Immediately, Amber was shocked and she called the police. When she informed them about the affair and about what he had told her about what he said with his wife being missing, this is when the police had an idea. They were going to have Amber start recording their phone calls. And she agreed to this, guys. So, unknowingly, Scott would still call her, and just like he had promised. And on New Year's Eve, when he called and she heard all the noise in the background, he claimed he was in Paris near the Eiffel Tower, when in fact he was at his wife and unborn son's vigil. So, now we know why he was on his phone constantly, because that's disgusting. He was talking to his mistress while at his wife and son's vigil. I'm sorry, that's just... That right there kind of ticked me off. But, finally on January 6th, Scott called Amber and decided to come clean about everything. He would tell her that the girl he had been married to had disappeared just before Christmas. So for Amber, this was the perfect time, she thought, to try to get information from him. So she started questioning him, asking him you said you lost your wife. What was that about? How did you lose her then before she was actually lost? Explain that. And he would kind of stutter it all out. And he's like, she's alive. And then would say that there's different kinds of loss. And one thing I found interesting was she would even ask, do you know what happened to your wife? He goes, I did not harm my wife, but I know who did. Crazy. But police finally, after that, decided to take Amber and go public at a press conference. And even with the affair out in the world, Scott would still continue to call Amber until she finally was like, no, we can't do this no more. We need to go our separate ways. So that's when Scott decided, okay, this is my time. So he would then tearfully admit to the world he did have an inappropriate affair, But he would say that Laci had forgiven him for it and they had moved past it all. But honestly, I don't believe that at all. I don't think that Laci actually knew anything about this other woman. And I don't think she would have been okay with it. But the only person who could vouch for his story would be the person that's missing. Then on January 24th, 2003, police would find washed up on the shore of the San Francisco Bay, south of Richmond, a male fetus. The very next day, a woman walking her dog along Point Isabel Regional Shoreline would find the torso of a woman's body lodged in the rocks. This was only about a mile away from where the baby was found, guys. Like a mile away from each other. During all this, on February 10th, 2003, the family and community would hold another vigil for Laci and Connor. This time, it was on Laci's due date. That was the day they were supposed to have Connor. But that hope that they had, because this family still had hope that they were going to get to come home. But that hope didn't last at all, and it would be squashed and it would vanish because the body of the woman and the male fetus would later be positively identified as the bodies of Laci and Connor Peterson. Finally, on April 18th, 2003, days after Connor and Laci's bodies had washed up on the shoreline, and this is just north of Berkeley. And remember, he went to Berkeley to go fishing. So this ain't too far from where he went fishing. Officials would go to arrest Scott, but he was not going to go down easy. It would take a long pursuit, guys. I'm talking about hours. He left Modesto and was on his way. Literally, they finally stopped him just 30 miles from the Mexico border. Now, when they found him, this is the crazy thing, because like I said, this man said that he did not do anything to harm his wife. He had nothing to do with it. Nothing like that. But he ran. It was like he was running to Mexico, and he changed his appearance. He was sporting a goatee. He had taken his dark hair and colored it now like a reddish blonde, kind of like mine. And he had camping gear, guys. He had 4 cell phones, his sister's credit card, his brother's driver's license, and a large stash of cash. And guys, when I say large stash, guys, I'm talking $10,000 in cash. Now, one thing I found interesting about this was it was later said that Scott had taken out a $250,000 life insurance policy on Laci. And on top of that, just weeks following Laci's disappearance and before the bodies were even found, Scott had sold his wife's car. He looked at selling at the house and even turned what was supposed to be Connor's nursery into a storage room. Like, why? Like, you're wanting them to come back. You're wanting hope that they're coming back, and you believe that they're coming back, and you do this? Like, why? And then now he has all this cash on him. To me, it's just crazy. And like I said, if he was innocent, why disguise himself and try to run? Doesn't make sense. And it doesn't look good on him at all. So now that police had Scott in custody, they started their long drive back to town from where they picked him up, 30 miles from the Mexico borderline, back to Modesto. And during this ride, that's when they informed him that the bodies of his wife and son were identified as the ones that had washed up. You would think finding this out, the husband and father-to-be would be devastated. But if he was, it did not affect anything. It did not affect his appetite at all. Because on the way back to the police station, they went ahead and stopped because it was a long drive. They stopped for a bite to eat. And Scott ordered a double hamburger, fries, and a shake. I'm sorry, if I just got news like that, I would have been devastated. I would not be able to even think about eating. Like, that would be the furthest thing from my mind. Your loved ones are dead. Your wife is never coming home. You're never going to get to hold your baby. Like, come on. Now, since this case was such a big case, it swept the nation. So the trial would be held in Redwood City, and it would last about 9 months. And the funny thing is, guys, and it's amazing, that it would cost the city and county a reported $4.1 million for this case. $4.1 million. Okay, so also, since he had that $10,000 cash on him, he apparently had some more money somewhere, because he ended up hiring Mark Gregos. Now, this is the same attorney that defended Michael Jackson and Winona Ryder, and his defense ways were always kind of crazy, but this one's crazy, okay? So he would state that he had a female witness that had important information about Laci being abducted by a cult, a satanic cult. And the reason he came up, they think, with this scenario is because in May of 2003, the autopsy report of Laci would be leaked, and it would suggest that Connor was cut from her body before they were disposed of. He cut the baby out of his wife's body. Okay, I'm not even going to think about it, but I do want to say this though, and I hate to say it because it's an awful situation, but I really hope that Laci and the baby did not feel that him ripping that baby away from her like that, because Lord knows what pain those two went through prior to this. He mutilated their bodies, obviously. Like, I just pray that they did not have to endure more pain than they had already done. But during trial, people close to Scott would kind of take the stand and tell some really troubling stories about him, okay? A lot of people at the beginning had said that they were so excited that they were having a baby. But then there was some that would say, in trial, that Scott one time had stated he was hoping for infertility, and he seemed uneasy around babies. Now, that doesn't sound like a man excited about becoming a father. And when evidence was presented, which is one of the biggest pieces of evidence that they had, was when the officers searched Scott's warehouse, his work warehouse, they found cement dust. Now, there was a lot of it covering, and the cement dust would be traced to the cement dust that is made to make multiple cement anchors. But where those anchors were supposed to be, those multiple cement anchors, there was only one. Where's the rest of them? So when the trial was over, it would take 9 hours, guys, for the jury to reach a verdict. And that was after they had to replace 2 jurors with alternates. And we'll get into that, okay? But they replaced 2 jurors with alternates. And they ended up finding him guilty. Thank goodness. And then on March 16th, 2005, that was the day of his sentencing. And Scott would just walk into the courtroom with a big smile and laughing. It was literally like just another day in paradise for him. Even after Laci's brother Brent had read his victim's impact statement, and said that he had purchased a gun. He had literally purchased a gun, and he was going to go there and kill Scott for what he did to his sister and his nephew. But instead, he decided that he was going to let fate have its way. Thank goodness, because that family does not need any more hurt and pain. To me, the way Scott acted kind of shows he was a straight psychotic sicko. Like, who goes in being convicted of the murder and mutilation of your wife and your unborn child, go in there smiling, no remorse, nothing. Like, who does that besides a true psychotic sicko? So when the judge, before I go crazy again, when the judge decided to do his sentencing, he wouldn't be smiling for long, honestly, because he sentenced Scott to death that day and ordered him to pay a $10,000 in restitution for the funeral expenses. And that day he went to San Quentin State Prison. And everybody knows that's like the death row of California. That place is hardcore. Like, I would love to visit that prison as a corrections officer, but I'm telling you right now, I don't want to work there. I am getting too old to deal with all that haginess. No. So, now guys, from my experience, working in Melmax facilities, like, I do know some inmates have fans, and yes, even that means even the rapists, the murderers had female fans. Like, they had a lot of them. And especially the high profile cases like BTK, the Carr brothers that I know of. There's a lot of other famous rapists and murderers that do have female fans, which is weird to me. But Scott was no different, okay? He was reported that on the day that Scott arrived, he even had 2 women that called wanting to marry Scott. Like, come on, ladies. He killed his pregnant wife and mutilated her body and murdered his unborn child and cut him from his mother. Like, why would you want to marry that? But honestly, like, not even going to get into it. They have to be crazy. So, it even was stated that the inmates would give him a nickname, Scott a nickname, and it was Scotty Too Hottie. But finally, in about 2010, finally the calls would dwindle down, thank goodness. But guys, this wasn't the last we were going to hear or see of Scott Peterson, okay? Because on June 2020, the California Supreme Court would want to re-examine his case based on the accusation of a juror misconduct. That's why they had to replace 2 jurors. Remember that, supposedly. Then in August of 2020, they asked for a re-examination in July of 2020, or June of 2020. And then in August 2020, his conviction was overturned and he was taken off the death row. And in 2021, at his resentencing, Scott was completely emotionless, completely no remorse, would be told that he would still be serving a life without parole. At least he is still never going to see the light of day, and Laci and little Connor still got their justice. And honestly, I think that it's good for him to just sit there. I don't want him to have it easy in life at all, but I think he just needs to sit there and think and live with what he did. Like, what he did to that beautiful woman and that poor baby. But, again, thank you guys for tuning in with me. And until next time, stay blessed.